Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, October 20th, 2015. Getting into the week here, we've got oodles of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, starting off at the top, yesterday's Canadian elections were dramatic to say the least. The Liberals won. It was more than a landslide. It was a rout. And it wasn't so much a vote for the Liberals and for the new Prime Minister Justin Trudeau so much as a rejection of Stephen Harper and his policies over the last several years. The Canadian people just got sick and tired of the abuses of their freedom, this constant pandering to Israel. And hopefully this is going to have an impact on Arthur Tofem's trial, where he is facing 2 years in jail for daring to criticize the government of Israel in a country that supposedly has freedom of speech, allowing you to criticize the government of Canada. You can criticize Canada all you want, criticize the United States all you want, but if you criticize Israel, you are going to jail. Maybe, maybe not. This is going to have dramatic repercussions across the entire political structure of Canada right now. So they're very happy up there, and here is hoping that the Canadian rout of Harper presages a similar heave-ho to the entrenched neoconservative money junkie war machine in the United States a year from now. Hope, 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 hope. Major election, highest voter turnout since 1993. And that really tells you that this was more about a rejection of Harper than putting Trudeau in. Because when, people will get out there to vote against somebody. They may stay home. Yeah, he's going to win anyway. I don't need to get out there. But when they decide it's time for somebody to go, they turn out in droves. And that was what happened yesterday in Canada. So it's another indicator that here in the United States next year may be the year of the mavericks, of the outsiders. And there's going to be this huge anti-incumbency fever sweeping the nation, anti-Friends of Israel fever sweeping the nation, because we're sick and tired of it. All right, over in Syria, as you heard on the news break, the U.S. government is now agreeing to accept Russia's offer to coordinate the airstrikes so they don't crash into each other over Syria, while still saying we don't agree with Russia's policy in Syria, which is really not up to them, because remember, Russia is there at the invitation of the Syrian government. The United States is not. Little fact the U.S. government keeps hoping that you will forget, but we won't. Article coming out of Russia Insider, playtime is over. Russia to increase missions in Syria to 300 per day. And at that rate, 300 missions a day, the Russian Air Force is going to wipe ISIS out before you can say moderate CIA-trained rebels. That is going to be one heck of a mess here. Now, we're getting some reports. The king of U.S. TOW anti-tank missiles killed in Russian airstrike in Latakia. Apparently they got Abu Hamza, chief of staff of the Coastal Division. He was trained by the United States. They're even admitting it. This terrorist was trained by the United States, and he was an expert in operating the U.S.-supplied anti-tank missiles. So that's a major victory. 3 top militant commanders killed in Latakia, Kafi Fad and Abu Libya from the so-called Asifet al-Hazm Battalion, and the leader of Sayed al-Shuhuda Hamza Battalion, nicknamed as Abu Hamza, were killed also during airstrikes. They're picking those guys off here. Now, the Speaker of the Syrian People's Assembly, Mohammed Jihad al-Laham, has said it is obvious to everybody the Syrian-Russian gains in 2 weeks overshadow everything the U.S. claimed to have done in the previous year. It is a huge humiliation for the United States. Those of us who know the reason the U.S. wasn't really going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda understand why this is so. But for people who drank the Kool-Aid, believed the propaganda that the U.S. was in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it is a huge disappointment. Russia has demonstrated its supremacy in conventional warfare. Even the U.S. Army commander in Europe is saying he was astonished by how well the Russians have done. So, let's grab a quick phone call here. Peter up in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hello, Mike. First off, thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
It is so appreciated. You're a voice in the wilderness. I just wanted to say something about the Canadian election that I found very interesting. We had what was the left-wing party, the NDP.
Mm-hmm.
They were leading in the polls because, yes, everyone wanted to get rid of Harper, and the Liberals were not moving very much at all. Once they started throwing their candidates under the bus for relatively innocuous statements about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, their popularity tanked.
Yes.
Absolutely tanked. They started with, they were hoping to win, the Prime Ministership of Canada, and they ended up with about 50 seats out of, 340.
So the Canadian people are waking up to this whole friend of Israel con, and hopefully the American people will be following that example.
Oh, and it's trying to get the media to actually acknowledge it. They're going everywhere, trying to explain to the public why the NDP crashed. And all one has to do is look at the tracking polls and the dates on which they started throwing their guys under the bus for Israel, and it's as plain as the nose on your face. It's phenomenal. And once again, both you and your lovely wife, for all you do, you may not have a lot of material wealth, Mike, but you share your wealth and you make us all richer.
Oh, well, thank you very much for those very, very kind words, and congratulations on having a successful change of regime up there, and hopefully Trudeau's going to come on in and he's going to start undoing all of this draconian spying on the Canadian people, going to undo all of these ridiculous laws that say you can't criticize the government of Israel, and hopefully pull back from this fascist abyss that Harper had driven your country to the edge of.
Unfortunately, Mike, I think what we're going to find is just how powerful the Anglo-American establishment and the state of Israel is in Canada. And that will hopefully be more of an eye-opener for our quickly awakening populace.
What we're seeing here in the United States, especially following that farce in the U.S. Congress over the P5+1 deal, now the American people are seeing with their own eyes that it is not a wacko anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, that Israel holds an undue degree of influence over our government. The Canadian people are waking up to the same reality. And to be very honest, it looks to me like Israel's iron grip on the throats of both of our nations is starting to slip. So let's get out the Wesson oil and pour it all over their fingers and wish them well on their way.
Well, let's hope for the best. We need it.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go and switch over to DJ in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just wanted to make a quick comment. I don't know if you received an email that I sent with a video that's linking to Miran Kesh with the Kesh Foundation. He's the Iranian scientist that was working on, this new field of science, and they had some pretty big breakthroughs with like energy and medical.
It rings a bell. I don't know that I actually watched the video. And listen, DJ, we're going to have to take a 4-minute break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you as soon as we're back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go back to DJ in Georgia. You were talking about this Iranian scientist and some alternative solutions to problems.
Yes, it was there's a video that was posted up. I think it's on his main website right now, and it's a good intro to kind of get an idea of what the technology is about and the different applications. And it was the most fascinating thing that I've come across recently, and he's had a lot of major breakthroughs. Recently he did something to help out the Japanese government with the Fukushima radiation leak, and he's also, I guess, they've appointed him as like a head of the new, spaceship technology in Iran. They're supposed to be heading up their version of NASA, and they're going to be using, they're not going to be using rocket fuel, which has made, the U.S., NASA, and all these kind of guys really, really suspicious of them. And he just seems to be a very genuine, very just brilliant, genius guy. And the fact that he's Iranian does not help his cause one bit.
In fact, it makes him a target. I mean, a lot of Iranian scientists have died under mysterious circumstances over the last couple of years. Listen, do me a favor and send me that URL again, and in the subject line, all in caps, Iranian scientists, and I'll make a point of looking at that. But DJ, we're going. All right, thank you. We're going to let you go and switch over to Bernard in Canada. Aloha, Bernard. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thanks. Well, I just wanted to say I feel much better about being a Canadian today than I did for the last 10 or 12 years.
I've been hearing that from a lot of Canadians.
Yeah. So I think the only thing is we had a better opposition before. It's too bad that Thomas Mulcair isn't the official leader of the opposition, because he's got the right approach on. He's opposed to the TPP, and he's also was very opposed to legislation that Trudeau went along with, which is kind of creeping fascism, the security bill, stuff like that. So there's actually 4 opposition leaders, so that might be a help, because without a strong or a good opposition, we don't really get good government in the long run.
Well, I agree with you on that. Unfortunately, my understanding is that the Liberals have won enough seats where for the next 4 years, Trudeau basically is going to be running the Canadian government, and there really isn't going to be a strong opposition to whatever his agendas and policies are going to be. But I think everyone is breathing a sigh of relief that Harper and the Conservatives are now out. And this previous caller mentioned it. The New Democratic Party destroyed themselves when they openly and visibly went on the warpath against their own candidates who were critical of Israel. And that definitely, clearly turned off the Canadian voters. And hopefully the American voters are going to learn something from that.
Right, and Trudeau's opposed, he said before the election, he's opposed to it, he would stop the bombing against so-called ISIS or whatever. That's very specific, because I'm tired of have our country made into warmongers, and war criminals, if I may say.
Well, no, you have every right to say that, and it's another sign that the so-called U.S. coalition of the arm-twisted is starting to fall apart.
Yes, right on.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, we are seeing from TASS, Syria intelligence is reporting, as they start counting up all the bodies, that there is a sudden influx of hired mercenary soldiers pouring into the ranks of the terrorists. Gee, I wonder where they're coming from, and more importantly, who is signing those very lucrative paychecks, because mercenaries, they get paid a heck of a lot more than your ordinary conscripted line soldiers, sailors, and air people. But mercenaries are pouring in, and that's what the U.S. has been doing all along. Hired mercenaries. The Free Syria Army, 95% of them were not Syrian. And so now they're pouring more of these hired mercenaries in there, trying to halt Russia's advance, and Russia's just going to escalate the airstrikes. And we can see the writing on the wall. It's going to be over. Now then, you probably heard on the news break where Putin has announced that Russian security services have foiled 20 terror plots in Russia this year. Obviously doing a far better job of protecting their nation from terror than George W. Bush did, for you Trump fans out there. And they've arrested hundreds of terrorists. I wonder who they were working for. Well, apparently the one they just most recently got was from a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir al-Islami. And they rounded all of them up, and it was rather interesting timing, because the U.S. had sent a message to Putin saying, there's going to be blowback, there are going to be terror attacks in your country because of your intrusion into Syria. And Russia did not intrude into Syria. Russia was invited into Syria. And so obviously the suspicion is all of these terrorists operating around Moscow are part of the classic U.S. destabilization process. And sure enough, I found an article over in the state of Pakistan.org, no less, that this Hizb ut-Tahrir is another phony, made-up terrorist group run by British MI6. They're just like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're creations of Western intelligence agencies to wag at you, to get your money, to get the lives of your children in wars of conquest. Now, Turkey has issued a warning to Russia. They're closing their airspace to all Russian aircraft to try and keep more aircraft from flying into Syria to support Russia's mission there. And Turkey is saying any Russian planes that cross our airspace are going to be shot down. This is supposedly on the basis of an unknown drone that was shot down in Turkey a few days ago. Now, when that drone was first shot down, everybody said, Russian drone, Russian drone, Russian drone. Now they've had to back off of it. They're not saying whose drone it is. But Erdogan is out there saying, well, it doesn't matter whose drone it is. We're telling the Russians, you can't cross our airspace or we'll open fire on you. Now, not too long ago, there was a report that was making its way around the corporate media and the Internet that Cuba had sent soldiers to assist Bashar al-Assad against the U.S.-backed terrorists. How could Cuba do that? And it was all based on an anonymous source and statements made by this Institute for Cuban Studies at the University of Miami, which happens to historically be one of the largest domestic CIA stations in the United States. And they were tangled up with the Bay of Pigs, Operation Mongoose, and all of that stuff. And so basically it was a worthless allegation, but it was carried by the corporate media. Cuba has now denied reports of having sent anybody to Syria, and as I speculated when the report first came out, this appears to be the start of a propaganda campaign to justify a new U.S. invasion of Cuba because nobody holds a grudge like the United States of America. Another story over in Lively talking about media disinformation, pointing out all the flaws with this imaginary Cuban troops in Syria. We're going to take a break for commercials and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. Now, we're seeing a very alarming trend among the GOP candidates who are out there campaigning for your votes. And they're out there saying it's time for a Syrian no-fly zone. Apparently Governor Chris Christie is out there saying he would shoot down Russian jets. Okay, here's your parachute. Here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit. Same thing with Hillary Clinton. We need a no-fly zone. And she's not a GOP candidate, but she's out there. We have to have a no-fly zone. Now, small but important point. The United States has no legal right to establish a no-fly zone over Syria. Syria's government has not asked the U.S. for help against the terrorists. The United States has not officially declared war on Syria, and the United Nations has not given the United States an authorization to intervene in Syria, or for that matter, every other nation the U.S. has poked its nose into without welcome. Setting up an American no-fly zone over the Russian no-fly zone inevitably is going to bring U.S. and Russian planes into direct conflict. And let's call it what it really is. A no-fly zone is another name for a blockade or a siege, which are acts of war. So we ought to take all these candidates who think a no-fly zone and escalation of the war is a good idea. Let's airdrop them into Damascus, or even better, let's airdrop them into Moscow, rather than your kids. Okay. Now, Russian bombing in Syria has pushed, well, this is coming out of the U.S. government. The U.S. government is now claiming that Russia's intrusion into Syria has pushed ISIS into Libya and other countries, which justifies escalation of U.S. military activity in those other countries. That's the new excuse. We have to go in there. Russia's intrusion into Syria made the situation uncontrolled, and they're pouring into countries, and apparently the U.S. is getting ready to escalate the situation in Libya, because the Saudi Arabian military, acting as a U.S. proxy, has not been able to whip those Yemenites back into obedience. And that's what it's really all about. Remember 2 years ago, Obama was saying, no, that was Yemen. I'm confusing all my countries. They've invaded so many of them. But this is all about the U.S. overthrowing governments, installing puppets, and the people of those countries refusing to stay conquered. And so we have to keep going back into these countries over and over again. Iraq for the third time. Libya twice. Yemen twice. Now they're going back into Afghanistan again. And that's the new excuse. Oh, it's all Russia's fault. They bombed Syria, and ISIS is now in all these other countries. ISIS is a fraud. It's a made-up enemy by the U.S. government. It's just like out of George Orwell's 1984. Emmanuel Goldstein, an enemy created by the government to terrorize the people into obedience. Now, speaking of Iraq, Iraq is seriously considering asking Russia to come into Iraq to deal with the terrorists who are trying to reconquer the place from the Iraqi people by proxy, and kicking the U.S. out. This is coming out of Iraq's parliament. They're kind of sick and tired of being ruled from afar, just like the Canadians are, just like the Americans are. And they may seriously say, U.S., we don't need you anymore. You don't have a legal right to be here. We're rescinding our invitation. We want the Russians to come on in and get rid of all these terrorist groups that are actually on the U.S. payroll to begin with. Now, over in South Ossetia, they're talking about a referendum to unite with Russia. So the world is changing dynamically. All these countries are moving over to cooperate with Russia for a very simple reason. Russia is making deals where the U.S. has been making war. Common sense tells you they're going to follow the path of peace through commerce. Russia has now, is about to deliver 1,700 tons of aid to the Donetsk Republic. Actually, that's the running total right now. They've delivered 1,700 tons of aid to Donetsk. They're going to need it because we're hearing from TASS that Kiev forces are going to launch an offensive near Donetsk. They've thrown the Minsk agreements out the window. Poroshenko's been given his marching orders. You will reconquer those pesky independent eastern Ukrainian provinces, and you will enslave them to the European Central Bank. Meanwhile, everyone's talking about this major exercise NATO is getting ready to do to prepare for a major war. They won't say with who, but we can all guess. And this is NATO's biggest military exercise in 13 years. 36,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen from more than 30 countries to test NATO's ability to respond to new security threats. Gee, I wonder who they're talking about. Most of those countries are using weapon systems and sensor systems from the United States of America, which we already know Russia has figured out how to jam and defeat. You know what this is? This is a theater pageant. This is a theater pageant. NATO wants to go on out and have a big theater pageant. It's all rehearsed. It's all scripted. We're going to go out and set off some big explosions and look mean and snarly because Russia's success in Syria has undermined the illusion of NATO and the United States military invincibility. So they have to come back and put on a show, with dancing girls and confetti and spotlights and rock music and clever editing. To say, see, we're the world's premier military. Because when you're a conquering army and people stop believing that you are invincible, resistance starts to grow and build. Now then, down in Israel and Palestine, the violence continues to escalate. More and more people are out there saying the problem is Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Since the creation of Israel, that's what's causing this. And you heard it from those callers from Canada. Canada's new Democratic Party destroyed itself by throwing their own candidates who were critical of Israel under the bus. And the Canadian people saw that as a clear sign that the new Democratic Party is an Israeli puppet. And as a result, the new Democratic Party took a shellacking. Now, there's an article coming out of MiddleEastRising.com saying that many of the so-called attacks by Palestinians on Israelis may be fake, false flag, fabrications to try and create this idea that nuclear-armed Israel is at a danger of annihilation from Palestinians holding rocks. Blame the victim, blame the victim. Meanwhile, story coming out of Mondoweiss, Israeli police evicts Palestinian family from East Jerusalem home and gives the property to settlers for a new settlement. That's what's really going on. It's another Israeli land grab. And Netanyahu is doing it to assuage his bruised ego from his defeat on the P5+1, from the fact that Israel cannot get any of their warplanes past the Russian air defenses in Syria, and because Netanyahu's future election depends on pandering to the hardliners. So that's what they're doing. The settlers, guarded by the IDF and Israeli police, they go in, kick Palestinians out of their homes, take it over, and say, this is now an Israeli settlement. That's what they're doing. Now, Paul Larudi, interviewed on Fars News, is saying we have to find a way to make Israel's occupation impossible to continue, politically or economically. Because Israel doesn't stay on its side of the lines are constantly being moved. Kuwait is calling for Israel to be kicked out of the International Parliament, the Union of Parliaments, over their treatment of the Palestinians. Now in New York, they had a huge protest pro-Palestinian. They had 1,500 people on the streets of New York. We've got photos about it. The corporate media claimed only 200 showed up. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Charles Krauthammer has been all over the media defending Israel, attacking Syria, Iran, so forth and so on. He's also a columnist at the Washington Post, which tells you a lot about the Washington Post. And Krauthammer is out there slamming President Obama's comments, drawing a moral equivalence between Israel and Palestinian terrorism, saying both sides are to blame, which is an accurate assessment. But Israel's agenda is, we are always good, they are always bad. If you don't see it that way, you're a dirty, filthy, anti-Semite Jew hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. And Krauthammer basically came out and said Obama's is the most unfriendly president to Israel since the founding of the state. Well, Charles, I have a news flash for you. It isn't the American president's job to be friendly to Israel. It's the American president's job to be friendly to America. And I understand why Krauthammer and his ilk are out there. They're in serious trouble. They're losing the propaganda war. People are willing to stand up and criticize Israel now. And every time Israel destroys another career, like they did at the NDP, they're actually moving closer to their own demise. Meanwhile, the United States government, in order to atone for its failure to yield to Israel's demand to kill the P5+1, is taking more of your money to send to Israel. The aid to Israel is going to increase after 2017 to sort of kiss and make up and make Israel happy again, to assuage its fears over Iran, which is kind of weird when Israel is a nuclear-armed state and Iran is not. But Israel's out there saying, we're afraid, send us money, send us money. We're afraid, send us money. Holocaust, send us money. Hitler, send us money. On and on and on. And I am sick and tired of how the United States government is constantly worrying about how Israel feels about anything and sees as the only solution to Israel's upset to loot the pockets of the American people. I'd like to see a U.S. government that's more concerned with how we, the American people, are feeling right now. And they don't seem to really care, do they? Now, last week, I applauded MSNBC for its showing of a map of how, since its founding, Israel has been grabbing more and more of Palestine. It's a very well-known map all over the net. We have it included in our story, Israel and Palestine. The maps tell the true story. And, of course, immediately MSNBC came under attack from Israel supporters who are out there pushing this idea that was created by Golda Meir, that there never really was such a thing as Palestine. How can you feel sympathy for Palestine and the Palestinians? They don't exist. They were just made up by Jew haters. And MSNBC has now issued an apology. So they chickened out. They backed down. And Israel's minions on the net, the megaphonies, are all over there attacking anybody talking about the map, screaming there's no such thing as Palestine. You know, the maps are all fake. The coins are fake. It's all a crafted conspiracy to create the illusion that there was a Palestine. By the way, do you know recently a postcard sent by Golda Meir to a friend in Tel Aviv was just sold at auction? It's from the 1930s, and the address says Tel Aviv, Palestine. And Golda Meir is the one who came up with this idea of saying there never was such a thing as Palestine. And if you refuse to believe us, then you're a dirty, filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the oven. So I take back all the nice things I said about MSNBC. They chickened out. They actually reported the news, and now they're hanging their heads in shame. John McCain is out there saying that we need to have 20,000 troops in Afghanistan because those gosh darn Afghani people will not stay conquered. Here's your rifle, John. Here's your parachute. Here's your Dayglow jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Have fun. Now, some while ago, I posted an article, Opium in Afghanistan, to my website, talking about how one of the major agendas for the United States going into Afghanistan was to restore the flow of opium for American drug lords to be selling to your children. And we had photographs of coalition and even American troops guarding and protecting the opium poppy fields and actually handling the bags of the raw opium. And everybody said, oh, that's complete nonsense. Our government would never do anything like that, forgetting the lessons of Air America in Vietnam and the Iran-Contra cocaine and gun scandal. Well, Russia Today has come out with a video, a documentary, on exactly what's going on. The U.S. government is in the heroin business in Afghanistan. Now, the U.S. has tried to explain away the fact that heroin is flowing out of Afghanistan by saying those poor Afghani farmers, if we don't let them grow and sell heroin, they've got nothing else to do. Really? What were they doing when the Taliban was in control of Afghanistan and outlawed opium? They had to be doing something. Can't they go back to that? The biggest drug dealer in the country is the country. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the economy. Ron Paul has an article out there. Here's why Congress should not raise the debt ceiling. And I admire Ron Paul greatly, but he has missed the point. The question is not whether Congress should or should not raise the debt ceiling. The question every single American should be asking is why, when the Constitution authorizes the government to create its own money interest-free, does our government persist in borrowing money at interest from a privately owned central bank, shackling you and generations to come to hopelessly unpayable debt? That is the real question every American should be asking, and the money junkies and the government are desperate that you not ask that question, because they don't have a real good answer other than, hey, we get a piece of the action. They're dealing with the same thing up there in Canada with the Comer lawsuit. The Canadian government has actually started blocking websites in Canada that report on the Comer lawsuit. The whole scam is becoming exposed. More reports, China is selling U.S. debt. A lot of countries are selling U.S. debt. They're selling their treasury bills. I don't know who's crazy enough to buy them. I think the Federal Reserve is. They're just cranking out more ink and paper and buying back those T-bill notes until finally they're going to own the government through that debt. And all they spent for it was numbers and a keyboard, some ink and paper, and that's it. That's the scam here. There was actually a lawsuit not too long ago where a man was fighting a foreclosure action on his home on the argument that the bank hadn't really provided anything of tangible value to him. It had simply typed numbers into a computer. It had created the money out of thin air. And the bank admitted, yeah, that's what we do. When you get a loan, we just type the numbers into your keyboard. We grant our noble permission for you to conduct your lives as long as you enslave yourself to us in repayment. And he won the lawsuit. And the money junkies went ballistic. Now, the lawsuit was never overturned, but it was retroactively declared invalid, meaning nobody could cite it as a legal precedent in any other foreclosure cases. Meaning we got the goods on them and they're just going to change the rules. Yes, you're right, we're making up the money that we loaned to you and you have to work to pay it back, but that's just the way it is. Now, there's an article that came out of Patriot Rising. Yes, the U.S. government really is bankrupt. Here's proof, and it's just a simple number exercise. How much the U.S. government is in debt versus what the assets of the United States are actually worth. And at the very most generous, the U.S. government is $7 trillion in the hole. After they sell everything they own, which includes everything you own, they're $7 trillion in the hole. And it gets worse than that, because when you include all the unfunded liabilities and various other situations, the U.S. government really is bankrupt. Their liabilities overwhelm their assets. But because they're the government, they're allowed to go on with it, and their answer to every problem is take more money away from you. All right, we're going to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials, and we will be right back after these brief words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the economy and a very serious, timely question. Will Illinois be the first United state to go bankrupt in the current financial crisis? It certainly looks like they're headed that way. They've had to cancel all the payments to their lottery winners. They're issuing IOUs. They've had austerity cut to the bone. And still they cannot pull out of the debt. Why? Because under private central banking, debt always exceeds the money supply. That is the trap. Now, today the stock market closed just a little bit down, not really to be upset about, but apparently the drop in IBM earnings really impacted Warren Buffett and his Berkshire Hathaway. They own 79 million shares of IBM, and they took an almost $600 million hit. And maybe that will limit Warren Buffett's ability to run around the world tinkering with other countries. All of which I think is a violation of the Boland Act. Unless he's under covert direction by the U.S. government. His funding of all these NGOs and stuff in other countries is his personal exercise in foreign policy. I think that's a Boland Act violation right there. Russia is getting ready to negotiate a free trade zone with Syria once the sanctions are removed from both countries. And again, we have it on full display. Russia is out there making deals, peace through commerce. All the U.S. knows how to do anymore is make war. It's what they're good at, or at least it's what they look like they're good at. And now we're not even sure about that anymore. Turning to the presidential race, everybody is still out there saying, is Biden going to run, not going to run? Fox News is saying, yes, he's in. Frankly, I think at this point he's in. He's made too many preparations. He's already got political committees in the early battleground states. He's already got the campaign machine in place. He's just waiting for an opportune moment to announce the green light. And at that point, Hillary's probably going to uncork on him with every piece of dirt that they could find on him. Because Hillary, in her delusional sense of ascendancy to the Oval Office, may not be afraid of Donald Trump, but she is rightly to be afraid of Joe Biden, because many of Hillary's top financial backers have already said, if Biden comes in, they're dropping Hillary, they're going to give their money to Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not carrying anywhere near the political baggage that Hillary is. Hillary's got more baggage than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. And it is coming back to haunt her. Now, Trump is still leading the field in the GOP. Got double-digit leads on a lot of these people. He's way, way out in front. Remember all the doom and gloomers who were a couple of months ago saying, oh, he's a flash in the pan. He'll self-destruct. He's gone. He's not serious. You don't need to. Well, that was then, and this is now. Article out of Washington Examiner. Panicked establishment gets ready for war against Trump. Because now the GOP leadership is saying Trump could actually win. right now he's positioned to win the GOP nomination. And he could take the White House. If it came down to Trump and Hillary, Trump is going to win. Hillary cannot beat any of the GOP candidates right now. And they're openly saying, we're going to find a way to get rid of him. And remember, back in 2008 and 2012, the GOP announced ahead of time, we're going to get Ron Paul out of this race. And they did. Smears, rule changes, simply blocking his delegates at the convention, every dirty trick imaginable to get Ron Paul out of there because he's not one of us. He's not one of the people who is loyal to Israel and the money junkies. He cannot be allowed to get in there. What is this will of the people crud? The people get to choose their own leaders. We could have democracy. That can't be allowed to happen. So they're getting ready to basically, they're trying to give Donald Trump the Ron Paul treatment. And my fear is that if that doesn't succeed, they'll give him the Robert Kennedy treatment. Because remember, it was right after Robert Kennedy won the California primary and was obviously positioned to take the Democratic nomination that he got shot and killed. That is a reality of politics in America. Presidents get killed by their opposition. Andrew Jackson was shot at, Lincoln was shot at, Kennedy was shot at. And lurking behind all of those were financial interests. The Second Bank of the United States, the Greenbacks, Executive Order 11110. That is the dark hidden hand behind American history. If you have not read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, I invite you to do so. It's permanently linked in that little tiny secondary menu at the top of my page. I invite you to read it, and I invite you to send it to everybody that you know. Now, Donald Trump, despite all of the fury being directed at him regarding his comments on Bush being president when 9/11 happened, is not backing down. And that's one of the characteristics about Trump, I think, is being most attractive. That he stands his ground. He stands by his word, unlike MSNBC, which crumbled from the criticism over that map of Israel and Palestine. And Trump has now gone one step further that Bush knew in advance 9/11 was coming. That, too, is a fact. The documentation is there that the White House was getting warnings from the intelligence agencies. Something big was in the works. And unlike Vladimir Putin, George Bush was not able to do anything about it. And here is a reality that the GOP needs to be dealing with. Here, the Bush's defenders. If Hillary Clinton is responsible for Benghazi, for the attack on the consulate, then George Bush is responsible for 9/11. Because they're the people in charge who are supposed to keep those things from happening. Now, I'm willing to take one more step beyond Donald Trump. He's not going to go in there and say that Bush had anything to do with 9/11. I'll cross that line for him. And I and some of our membership at WhatReallyHappened.com are reprising to the front page of What Really Happened many of the stories that indicate it was a staged false flag event, the new Pearl Harbor called for by the Project for the New American Century in their document, Rebuilding America's Defenses. We put up the link to the BBC's reporting of the collapse of Building 7, 26 minutes before it actually happened. We reprised our story about the Secret Service at Booker Elementary School. That is the dead giveaway. Knowing there was a terror attack involving airplanes, knowing there was an airport only 4 miles away from that school, the Secret Service did not move to protect President Bush. They knew he was not a target that day, and the only way they could know that is they knew ahead of time what the targets were going to be. Now, Judge Jeanine is out there on the warpath relative to Hillary, which must be angering to Hillary because Hillary just went into this whole campaign with the assumption that women everywhere were going to love her. And some do. There are a number of women out there saying, I'm voting for Hillary because it's time we had a woman president. Well, remember the 2008 when everybody voted for Obama because it's time we had a black president, and look at what we got, Obamacare, NSA spying, escalation of the wars by the Nobel Peace Prize winning president. So Janine is out there saying that, there are some questions that should be asked of her when she testifies before the Benghazi panel later this week. They probably won't be. Why did Hillary reject the peace talks for Libya? As one good example. What was the business interest in Libya that she was emailing Sidney Blumenthal all about? So we got to take a break here. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Damien in New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael. How you doing?
Doing fine.
I'm just, how you doing? Good to hear you again, on a Monday. I am calling because, there's just two things I just want to say, and they're really basic things that everybody has to wrap their head around. And these are important things, and it's easy to get distracted because they love to distract us with whatever they can, or attempt to distract us with whatever they can.
Yes.
First of all, 9/11. We know that the administration completely lied regarding what they knew and what they didn't know. We know that they had a presidential briefing back in, August?
Yes.
Before September. So before this even happened, they were warned. They knew it was going to happen. They didn't know when. They took no action. Why? That's first of all. They knew it. Second of all, they lied that they didn't know. Who would ever imagine that they would do? How many times did we hear that from Condoleezza Rice, from Bush, from Cheney, from all these people?
And then we find all these government documents that are illustrated with pictures of airplanes crashing into the World Trade Towers. I mean, if you've seen James Corbett's video, 9/11, A Conspiracy Theory, I mean, he just lays it out just how absurd the official story was.
We don't even need that. There's government documents it's been exposed in the government directly. It's all been exposed. We don't even need to hear any of that. It's all there.
Yes.
It's all there. So that's something people cannot forget and cannot be distracted by that fact. You had a president, a presidential administration, and an entire political establishment completely lie to the people about a very important fact of history, that they just try and erase it and try to make it something else, and just distract you from that obvious reason. And we know what happened as a result of that. The other thing, the economy. People talk about, well, we've got debt, we've got to deal with debt, we've got to deal blah, blah, blah. We know that the system is built to design and designed to make and create debt. There is no way that we will ever pay the debt. This is not a credit card. It's not a loan. It is more like a loan. It's not a credit card. You don't pay it off, and then all of a sudden you start from scratch and you don't have to worry about it. Imagine if you have a credit card and you have $1,000 on there, you pay it off. And even though you pay it off and your balance is zero, you're still going to get hit with interest payments. What credit card do you know that does that? They don't do that. So you can imagine the debt, the monetary system that we have is a credit card that once you pay it off, you still have to pay on it, no matter what. And the amount of money that you're having to pay is increasing because the value of the dollar is decreasing as they produce more money to pump into the system that's already broken. So people need to understand and wrap these things in their mind. And if you ever want to communicate to someone about the structure and how the system is designed to fail, these are important, very important basic facts that people really need to not be distracted from, because them talking about the debt is a distraction.
That's exactly the point I was making. That's the point I was making, is that people shouldn't get caught up in this question about whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. They need to be asking, why is our government borrowing money at interest from a private central bank when the Constitution allows the government to create its own money interest-free? That is the question everybody needs to ask.
Right. And like I said, this is a way for them to make a huge distraction for everybody. Focus on the debt. Focus on the debt. Well, it's designed to create debt. So you're manufacturing directly something for the people to have to be oppressed by and to be focused on when it's something that shouldn't even exist. So again, distraction, it's a tool. It's already in there. It's in place. It's not going to go away unless it changes. So, these are very basic things, and all somebody has to do is look at these things logically and understand that this is, in fact, the reality of what we live in. And, Mike, everything you're saying, I'm in agreement with, but there's these really basic things that people just, I don't know what to say. It's not as though they don't know them. They just choose sometimes to forget them or ignore them. And then they get on to another thing and another thing.
No, they're proving they're proving Stanley Milgram is right. Most people will just blindly obey authority even when they know authority is wrong. And it's a very dark admission about human nature, and most people are not comfortable with it, and they try and pretend it's not real, but we can see that, yes, it very much is. There was a movie out some years ago called The International about a bank that was involved in gun running, and in order to harvest, debt from the nations that were being driven into war here. And there's this one guy who has this wonderful quote in the middle of the movie, which is why it was panned by the corporate media and went away. It says, it is the essence of the banking industry to keep us all, whether we're nations or individuals, slaves to debt. And that was an absolutely brilliant piece of writing. It is absolutely true. And the bankers are trying to find some way to keep you from seeing that. Because the problem isn't that when we pay off the credit card, the interest is still there. The problem is we can't pay off the credit card because the debt is always greater than the money supply. There is not enough money to pay off the debt. That's what makes it a trap. Okay?
Yeah, I'm going to look that movie up. Yeah. In addition, like I said, of the fact that the value of the money is going down as this whole process is happening. Michael, thank you so much for taking my call.
You got it. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over here to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just tuned in, and I don't know if you talked about this yet, but did you see the announcement from the IMF?
Which one? I mean, they're always mouthing off about something.
But it says, leaders unite in calling for a price on carbon ahead of the Paris climate talks.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, they're desperate to get this carbon tax deal locked in, before this winter gets any worse. And it's already hitting early. It's hitting hard. They're already setting cold temperature records. We're going to talk about that later on. But right now, they're desperate to find any way they can take more money away from us to keep their little pyramid scheme going. And it's at best a delaying tactic. And it's just another way to impoverish the people, to make the money junkies richer than they already are. And it is an absolute scam and a fraud.
Like you say, I hate to say I'm right, but you're right.
Yeah, I'm right. By the way, I get a lot of emails criticizing me for saying, gee, I hate being right all the time as being false humility. Actually, it's a humorous reference to the movie Jurassic Park. It's the line that Malcolm says when the T-Rex breaks out of its pen and goes wild, and Malcolm says, boy, I hate being right all the time. And it's this wonderful underplayed line by Jeff Goldblum. And it's so funny, and that's where I got that from. Anyway, listen, we're coming up here on the end of this segment. We've got to take a break for commercials. You got about 10 seconds if you want to add anything?
No, I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, I had seen that, and yeah, they're desperate to get us to go along with the carbon tax before the winter really sets in and just proves to be this embarrassment. We'll be talking about global warming a little later in the show. Thank you for the call, Steve. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to Benghazi and Hillary's email server, we just got a report. We posted it to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Russia has succeeded in cutting the supply lines to the terrorist groups, and as a result, they're starting to fight each other over what remains. ISIS and al-Nusra are now warring with each other for the remaining arms, water, food, and so forth. Yeah, it's going to be over real soon. Now then, getting on back to Benghazi and the email server scandal. Memos from Hillary's email server have confirmed that in the weeks leading up to the attack on the Benghazi consulate, the consulate was expressing serious concerns about their safety. They kept asking the State Department for more protection, and Hillary Clinton's State Department kept saying no. These people were being set up to be attacked, to be sacrificed, to erase the paper trail for the gun running, possibly to create a terrorist incident that Obama could solve and look good for the media. Because remember, when that whole situation at Benghazi happened, Obama was trailing Romney in the polls. Everybody was saying Obama was going to be a single-term president. He needed something. So we're going to send in some actors playing at be terrorists. We're going to take the ambassador hostage, and we'll let the situation stew for a week. And the corporate media would be totally focused on it. Romney wouldn't be able to get a word in edgewise. And then Obama would go on in and resolve the situation. But I think what happened is when the Libyans living around the consulate heard the gunfire, they said, yes, we're getting rid of the Americans. And they all joined in. And what was a carefully staged, managed false flag attack turned into an out-of-control riot during which the ambassador and 3 others were killed. And immediately the White House came out and said, oh, this is just a spontaneous, we didn't know what was coming. It was a spontaneous reaction to this movie that insulted Mohammed, which we now know was a lie. That has also come out of Hillary's email server. That was another lie. And there's now a huge embarrassment that has surfaced. Because as you know, one of Hillary's emails that was a subject of concern was classified information on her private server, included the name of a CIA asset, which was redacted before it went to the Congress. But somehow it slipped out. And it turns out the CIA asset who was named in the email from Hillary's server is Musa Kusa, one-time intelligence chief for Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi. His name was mentioned in an email Clinton received 4 years ago from Sidney Blumenthal. Musa is the guy who's claimed to be the mastermind behind the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. So, thanks to Hillary's private email server, we now know that the mastermind behind the Lockerbie bombing has been exposed as a CIA asset. You think about that one for a while. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here from John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hello, Michael. Yeah, I just want to go back to this situation in Syria where this agreement between Putin and, or should I say, Russia and America to if you like, avoid collisions of aircraft.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, yes. And immediately after this made me laugh. Russia announces we're going to have 300 missions per day. And literally, these missions last 2 hours each. And then, how much flight time does America get over Syria with Russia flying 300 missions? I mean, good grief, is this a no-fly zone for America?
Well, not officially. Not officially. Russia's still out there trying to go along and say, look, we're here joining the U.S. agenda against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're just better at it than the poor Americans who need our help. And I imagine, Putin is very quietly smirking behind his handkerchief.
Yes, I believe so, because it doesn't give America much time, so they can't steal the glory, can they?
Well, I think they can be in the air at the same time. They're just going to say, Russia is bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the U.S. is going to go bomb the power station in Aleppo, so they're not going to get in each other's way. Even though the bombing of the power station in Aleppo is a war crime.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think America will be very, very short on airplanes over Syria simply because of the number of airplanes and missions that Russia's flying.
Well, the U.S. has been totally blindsided by Russia coming in and how good they are at getting all these ISIS figures. And now Russia's got ISIS and al-Nusra fighting each other over the dwindling supplies. And, the U.S. is now trying to look like this is all in accord with their grand design. And yes, we're going to coordinate with the Russians. And we don't think they should be there. But gee, thanks for coming in and helping us with our agenda. And I'm going to make a prediction here that in the coming weeks, the corporate media is going to try and make it sound like this is still under the control of the United States and Russia merely stepped in to help us, which of course is completely nonsensical. But that's what they're going to try and sell you.
Well, I think this deal is just another chess move, which proves the opposite. Now Russia is in charge.
Yes.
And America is hanging on to Russia's coattails now.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, this situation in the economy. I mean, the ridiculous figures that we're getting from the various departments. is total nonsense. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to knock holes in the unemployment figures. I mean, according to what I've been reading now, there's 104 million Americans that are out of work and available for work but can't find work. It's gone way beyond the 96 million.
Yes. It is getting much, much worse, and the U.S. government is out there saying, oh, we only have a 5% unemployment rate. They're lying about everything. They're lying, I mean, they're rigging the stock market, they're lying about the unemployment, they're concealing the true scale of government debt from the American people. I think they're even lying about, the record high tax revenues they're collecting. It's just all nonsense. We cannot trust a single thing coming out of this government, because they're in trouble, they're cornered, and they're still trying to figure out some way they can retain the trust and loyalty of the American people, and that is crumbling to dust before their very eyes.
So fewer and fewer workers are paying more and more tax to increase the tax take of the government. I simply don't believe it.
I don't either. I don't either. I don't think they're getting the tax revenues they claim to. They're trying to make it look like things are positive. It's like somebody who's overstating their income to get another loan from the bank, and that's exactly what it comes down to.
But it seems to me that this is just another confirmation that the administration and the establishment are clinically insane.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of sociopathy in the political mindset to begin with, but what it really comes down to is they have trapped themselves because of decades of just patching things over and changing the rules and the laws and trying to get on by, rather than address the structural flaw at the heart of the entire system, which is that private central bank. And it's only a matter of time, and we can't guess how long that's going to be, because as long as they've got the printing presses and the computer terminals, and they can change the rules the way they want, they can delay out the final crash. I mean, now we're seeing spreading all across America. If you have a bank savings account, you are losing money. They're taking your money from your savings account, and that is a trend that's going to accelerate. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, John, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you heard on the news break, the U.S. Senate has voted down the bill they were considering on defunding the so-called sanctuary cities. Now, they're basically saying this was all inspired by Donald Trump and his hatred for illegal immigrants and Mexicans and everybody else. And the bill had a strong amount of support, and Barack Obama basically came out and said, if you pass it, I will veto it. And that was a credible threat. They didn't have a veto-proof majority, so the Senate went ahead and voted it down, which means your tax dollars are going to continue to go to these designated sanctuary cities to pay for all these illegal immigrants who legally are not supposed to be here in the first place. I mean, this is the message we're getting from the White House and from the United Nations. You will love your illegal immigrants. You will love your refugees. You will not worry about the economic damage or the infrastructure or the loss of your cultural identity. This is what you will do. Now, there's an article here where Obama is now moving to give special support to illegal immigrant students. They're basically going to help these illegal immigrant students get financial aid as opposed to a student loan like legal American kids have to do. All kinds of scholarships going out to these illegal immigrant students. It's against the law for them to be here. And at current numbers, we're looking over the next 10 years, 14 million more immigrants will pour into the United States of America, 5 times the number of all U.S. high school seniors. There is no investment in the infrastructure to absorb 14 million people. Out in California, a big reason for the drought problem are the millions of illegals who are living there, drinking water, cooking, showering, washing. The infrastructure has not been expanded to deal with that. Now, over in Germany, the leader of the Pegida movement, which is basically after Merkel's scalp over this whole immigration thing, is out there saying there are no political parties in Germany who are addressing the issue of the loss of culture. Remember what I said before, that a big part of this open border agenda in Europe and the United States appears to be an attempt to pour in and blend so many different people that we lose our sense of a cultural regional identity. We stop caring about the fact that we're Americans because most of the people we're seeing aren't Americans anymore. America just sort of faded away in the noise, as it were. And the backlash is continuing. Over in Switzerland, they just had their elections. The anti-immigrant party won. Drove those people out. And here is a good example, I think, that there is an agenda to blur us all together, no matter what the cost. Okay? Over at Everett Middle School in San Francisco, California, they held student elections. And the principal of the school canceled the elections because not enough minorities won. The winners of the student election were not diverse enough for this guy's taste. We're just suspending the whole thing. Needless to say, the parents are furious. Elected office is supposed to be on the basis of meritocracy, not a quota system. Look how much trouble that's gotten us into already. Oh, vote for Obama. It's time we had a black president. And we got our black president, and we got Obamacare, and NSA spying, and more wars, and higher taxes, and open borders. Now they want us to vote for Hillary because it's time we had a woman president. I think it's time we all decide to be politically incorrect and raise our standards a little bit as to who we're going to allow into the government to manage our national sovereignty for us. It's amazing. Meanwhile, down in San Diego, little bit of a whoopsie. Apparently, at the Immigration Customs Enforcement down in San Diego, a supervisor is under investigation for using government time, meaning your taxpayer time, to recruit ICE workers for private sexual swinger parties at his home. And there's a lot of that going on in San Diego. But you're not supposed to do it on the taxpayer dollar. Boy, government service, what a sweet deal. You get paid 70% more than private sector workers, and you get to do all this other stuff. It's amazing here. Now, Fox News was actually running a story a little while ago. As you know, the gun grabbers have been full bore, so to speak. We had that article in Salon where this liberal professor said that before anybody should be allowed to buy a gun, they should experience what it's like to be shot. They actually said that we're going to take a gun, we're going to shoot you in the leg, in the hip, something, permanent injury, and only then will you be allowed to buy a gun. That's how ridiculous they're getting. What was the result of all this gun-grabbing hysteria over the last several weeks? Gun sales are through the roof, and political support for gun rights is soaring across the United States of America. Good for the American people. Now then, there's a story out, it was found at newsforge.com. Many low-income workers are saying no to health insurance. It is simply too expensive. These Obamacare-compliant policies are more expensive than previous policies. They have sky-high deductibles. Most people buying these policies, unless they have a major injury or illness, will not go through the deductible in an entire year. All that money is going out of their pockets. They will get no benefits back because it's under the deductible. It's a pure giveaway to the health insurance industry, and the U.S. government gets their piece of the action of the scam in taxes, except it hasn't really worked out all that well. So next year, the Internal Revenue Service is going to spike the penalty for those of you who refuse to buy your Obamacare policies. One way or the other, we will get the money from you. All right. Not too long ago, we reported on a story where a declassified document admitted that the Central Intelligence Agency had lied to the Warren Commission regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And there's now a new book out, The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government, written by David Talbot, basically looking at all the indications of the CIA being involved in the Kennedy assassination. They weren't doing it alone. There were multiple players in order to give them all plausible deniability. Somebody gets too close to the CIA, you point the finger of blame over at organized crime. Somebody gets too close to organized crime, you point the finger of blame over at the Texas oil billionaires. That's how these things get hidden. You're looking for a single perpetrator, and it isn't that way. Wars and assassinations are never carried out for a single purpose. You find a group of people, each of whose own personal agenda involves the assassination or the war, and that's when these things happen. You had a lot of players in the Kennedy assassination. You had organized crime, which felt betrayed after helping Kennedy steal the election, when John F. Kennedy made Robert Kennedy the Attorney General and sicked him on organized crime. You had the CIA, which was angry over the Bay of Pigs. You had the Federal Reserve, furious over Executive Order 11110. You had the Texas oil billionaires angry over the oil depletion allowance, and you had Israel that was angry over John F. Kennedy's refusal to let them get nuclear weapons. That's what's going on. There's another book out basically talking about Alan Dulles' career at CIA. He was involved in the overthrow of Guatemala's government in 1954, tried to overthrow Fidel Castro, didn't succeed. That's what these guys do. It's not like in the movies where they're just really good guys. I mean, I'd love to see a CIA the way Tom Clancy wrote about them. But it is a work of fiction. All of his book, work of fiction. And the real CIA is not like that. Basically think of them as mafia thugs wearing the American flag. That's probably much more accurate about the CIA. That was certainly my experience briefly with them at CBS Television City. All right, we got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Somebody's dialing in right now as we speak. We'll take that call here in a little bit. But I want to talk about a very alarming story that came out of naturalnews.com, which is a good resource for things besides natural food, organic food, alternative medication, independent medication. I don't use the term alternative anymore. It's already been spun with negative connotations. Oh, they're alternative. No, it's independent medicine. They're reporting on a story coming out of CNN that is basically going along with the latest propaganda from the Department of Homeland Security that constitutionalists and sovereign citizens are a bigger terror threat than ISIS is. And CNN has had a parade of guest analysts and hosts saying that Americans who believe in the Constitution are a bigger terror threat to the country than ISIS is. Moi? Yes, I support the Constitution. That is the original contract with America. And if the government doesn't want to play by those rules, they should all resign and seek gainful employment somewhere else. Not that that's going to be easy in this country the way they've messed things up. Maybe that's why they're clinging to power so hard. They know they've ruined the economy. There is no work out there for them. Now, down in Australia, there is a story coming out from one of their senators, Bill Heffernan, who is out there saying that a former Australian Prime Minister is on a list of alleged pedophiles on a file provided as part of a police document. They were starting an investigation down there, mirroring the one they had going on in Great Britain about just what the heck kind of people seem to be elected to these high offices. And probably what's going to happen in Australia is exactly the same thing that just happened in Great Britain. Oh, geez, sorry, the database is gone. That's it. It's all gone. Too bad. Speaking of deletions and hacking, we're hearing more and more about this teenage hacker who broke into the CIA director's email account at America Online. Not his government server account, but his America Online account, and how easy it was. Because apparently the hackers called up America Online, or they called Verizon rather, and they got information on Brennan's bank card, the last 4 digits, that they were able to then go into Brennan's email account and reset the password. And it's another reminder that Hillary's email server, which had weaker security than America Online, was indeed hacked and secrets stolen, or more to the point, traded in exchange for donations to the Clinton Charitable Foundation. Edward Snowden is out there saying that bigger revelations are yet to come as to what the NSA has been doing. And basically, the summary is the NSA is spying on the entire planet. And the planet does not like it. Except, of course, the NSA can't find real terrorists or criminals. Can't find the ransomware writers. Can't find the source of all the Viagra emails or other frauds and hoaxes and scams pouring into our email boxes. They don't seem to be really good at much of anything. All right, the phone lines are really loading up here. We're going to take Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're well.
I'm doing fine.
I'm Canadian, and I believe in the American Constitution.
It's a good document. Yes, it is.
Yes.
I think it's as historically important as the Magna Carta.
So if, the Americans, the elite and political elite and the rich get their way, and they do get to run the world, I'm hoping we all live under that one piece of documentation.
Well, that's not going to happen because they're trying to basically get rid of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's been a huge scandal involving the Common Core curriculum for public education having rewritten the Bill of Rights to change its meanings. And a good example is that according to Common Core, the Second Amendment gives you a right to keep and bear arms only if you're in a government-controlled militia, which is not what the Second Amendment actually says. But they're trying to change it, change the meaning of everything, because they don't want the American people to have free speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. They just want us to shut up, sit down, and do as we're told.
Yes, do as I say, not as I do.
Yes, very much so.
That commercial break that was on about Volkswagen, this Volkswagen emission scandal, you know what, Mike? I wanted one of those cars. I was going to trade in my 5-year-old car with low mileage and get like a brand new TDI because it would have been the last car I ever bought. And, of course, this broke. But I'll tell you something. I have yet to see one of these Volkswagens spew out black out of their tailpipe up in Canada, but I see it everywhere I go with all the big diesel trucks and buses and whatnot.
No, I'd consider a Volkswagen as my next car. I mean, I'm driving this 15-year-old Honda right now, and we have to deal with the reality. We're going to have to get a newer car very soon, and I'd certainly be willing to look at Volkswagens. My very first car was a Volkswagen. I have very fond memories of that car. I loved it. I would have kept it forever, except this Chevy came across the divider on Azusa Avenue and murdered my Beetle. But it's a tempest in a teapot because it turns out all of the car companies were doing it, and the only reason Volkswagen was singled out was Germany's decision to basically go over to Russia's approach to Syria. And now that France has done the same, I'm expecting some flagship French product to be denounced for poor safety or toxins or whatever. Renault, yes, or Citroën.
I mean, it's a big scam. Mike, I've been reading your website for years and years. I've listened to you for years. I mean, all you got to do is go back into the archives of what you've been saying a long time ago, and it's all come true. And here's the most important thing: all through that time, you've kept your sense of humor. And I'm telling you, a lot of times when I watch your show, I am on my seat laughing my head off. I love it.
Well, it's intentional.
I say thank you. You're doing a service.
Well, thank you. I try and keep things light and humorous because if you just address what we're talking about, it can get a little overwhelming at times. I feel it. My wife feels it. We get emails all the time saying it's almost too big, to comprehend all at one time, but it is the reality that we're living in. So, yeah, I tend to be a little bit goofy because it makes it a little bit easier for people to accept.
Keep up the Bill Clinton humor. I love it. That one, so we'll send it on over there.
Okay.
that China Gate, it's a beautiful thing. Mike, I know you're swamped here. Thank you very much for taking my call. You have a good one, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for the kind words. And we're going to switch over to Ralph in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. Mike, I keep in mind this is a friendly call before I get rolling here, Mike.
Okay.
Mike, there is a self-destructive lack of awareness in mainstream alternative broadcasting on the subject of income and income tax, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the mystery of the income tax deception has been solved for 12 years now. Now, I say 12 years, Mike, because that's how long Peter Hendrickson's book, Cracking the Code, The Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America, that's how long that book has been out. Now, Hendrickson, the author, he's the first person in history to get all of his deductions back in the form of a refund. And the refund takes place after an educated filing. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't something going on, Mike. There certainly is. Now, let me briefly fill you in on a timeline of what's been going on since then. By 2005, his book spreads far and wide over the internet only, and you've got hundreds of refund checks going out. People start copying their checks, and they send them to Hendrickson, and he starts posting them on his website.
Okay, yeah, I need you to kind of halt there. We got to take a 4-minute break, and I'll come right back to you as soon as we hear these words from our sponsors.
Thanks, Mike.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Ralph in Michigan, and Ralph was talking about, the fine details of tax law, and I mean, the tax law is a huge tangled mess. It's the accumulation of every special favor granted by Congress to a particular donor, and it is an absolute Gordian knot, and part of that is intentional. They don't want you to know what's really inside there, and it takes a supreme act of will to wade through it all and find out what's really going on and what lurks behind all of that. Ralph, are you there?
Yes, Mike. Well, Mike, I started to say that the checks are going out in the hundreds by 2005. By 2009, they're going out in the tens of thousands, and you can see all those checks that have been posted at Hendrickson's website, which is losthorizons.com. Mike, that isn't quite correct. Mike, the deception starts in 1943. What's actually going on here, Mike, and with your Hollywood experience, you can relate to this. This is a real-life, matrix-like deception.
Yes.
The deception begins in 1943 with the current Tax Payment Act of 1943. Now, Mike, there's something that's missing from your vocabulary. It's missing from everybody's vocabulary. It's called earnings at common right. Earnings at common right, you could call that private sector earnings in a modern language. Now, earnings at common right and income for income tax purposes, they are two entirely different things. The deception is something that's been hiding in plain sight. It's the word income. The word income, Mike, when it's used in reference to the income tax statutes in Title 26, that word is not being used in its common meaning. It is a special meaning. And that special meaning is relatively simple. You voluntarily engage in activities, in excisable activities. You see, the income tax is an excise tax, Mike. This is what people don't understand. And there's a lot of other tax honesty groups out there that don't understand this. It's an excise tax. An excise tax is a privilege tax, Mike. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great deal there. I can only speculate now in how many refund checks are going out. My own situation, I was outside of a withholding situation for 7 years by the time I got a copy of Cracking the Code in 2005, and I was worried about what I would do if I ever got a letter from the IRS. Well, I'll never forget the weekend I got a copy of Cracking the Code, and by Monday morning I wasn't worried anymore. It's basically like this, Mike. In the private sector, you are not engaged in an excisable activity. You're engaged in earnings at common right, okay? And there's a lot of good quotes in
Okay, Ralph, okay, I'm going to stop you here because you're descending into very tiny minutia. And
no, this is not minutia, Mike.
Ralph, please, my show.
Well, sure,
and it's very confusing for people to follow, and we need to basically get back to the fundamental idea that the whole thing really is a fraud anyway, because the Constitution forbids direct taxation without apportionment, and that part of the Constitution has never been repealed. Okay?
Mike, it's not a direct tax, Mike. It's an excise tax. Mike, if we were under a direct tax, which is a capitation, okay, we would have no contact with the federal government at all. That bill goes to the states, and the states deal with that. It's not a direct tax, Mike. You're fooled into signing up for an excise tax. That's basically how I can put it.
Okay. All right. Well, Ralph, what was that website you mentioned?
LostHorizons.com, Mike. Why don't you get Hendrickson up on your program,
well,
Mike?
we'll look into it here, and I'll look at his website. We're going to let you go here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thank you.
Bye-bye. There are a lot of opinions about what's going on. If it's an excise tax, why aren't they calling it that, to be very honest? But as long as this caller brought up the subject, I do want to mention Irwin Schiff, who recently passed away in prison. And he was shackled to a prison bed, dying of cancer, legally blind, was not allowed to be with his family members or even be in a hospital for palliative care to ease his passing, which is kind of funny because, as Davey Kidd correctly points out, in April 2015, convicted murderer Randy Weeks was given compassionate release to die at the Marion County Hospital in California surrounded by his family. So Irwin Schiff was treated worse than a convicted murderer for his crime of questioning the income tax. And as a matter of fact, something most people know, you think we've got freedom of speech in this country? We actually don't, because one of Irwin Schiff's books is banned in the United States. We actually do have banned books in the United States, and the book, How Anyone Can Stop Paying Income Taxes, was published in 1982, was a New York Times bestseller, and The Federal Mafia, How the Government Legally Imposes and Unlawfully Collects Income Taxes, for the first of 3 editions published in 1992, became the only nonfiction book to be banned in the United States of America. They don't want you asking impertinent questions. So, anyway, getting on back to the world of computers. If you will remember, not too long ago, there was a big stink regarding the shutdown of the Silk Road, and it came out a federal agent had been extorting bitcoins from the Silk Road system to basically, if you pay me, the investigation will go slow, and so forth and so on. That federal agent has been sentenced to 6 years in prison. And it is a reminder, people in the federal government are not automatically presumed to be good people. They aren't. For one thing, people drawn to government as a class of people, they want to have authority over others. They want to have power. I want to be able to come in and destroy your life. Alrighty, end of science health issues. Bedford, England, major protests there against fluoridation of their water. And it's become a hot button issue. Now, when they started fluoridation, anybody who questioned it was treated by the corporate media as a kook. They were made fun of in movies like In Like Flint and Dr. Strangelove. We now know that drinking fluoride has no effect on dental cavities, but it is a mild tranquilizer. Right out of Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. Get your daily dose of tranquilizers, keep you happy and obedient here. Now, over in Bedford Borough, not Bedford Borough, San Marcos in Texas is voting on fluoridation this coming November. They stopped fluoridation here in Hawaii back in the 1990s. People are turning away from all of this nonsense because we can't trust the government when they say you will have fluoride in your water. We don't know what their real agenda is. It certainly wasn't tooth decay. So the same reason to be concerned about all these mandatory vaccines. We don't really know what's in those needles. We can't trust this government because the government has given us ample reason not to trust. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and it's time to talk about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous chord here. There's a very enlightening article that came out of Aletho News talking about how the World Bank is playing a central role in carbon trading, where nations that have carbon limits, the corporations therein, are able to buy and sell carbon credits from other countries that have lower carbon emissions, to basically spread it around, all in the name of supporting sustainable development. And of course, everybody buying and selling carbon credits is making huge amounts of money off of this. They've literally created a new type of commodity out of thin air, the carbon credit, and it's unique because the carbon credit is the only commodity that is a promise not to deliver. And this article is basically going on in saying that for all the high rhetoric and explanations and excuses, examination of how the World Bank is handling the carbon trade, basically it's just another profit center for them. The governments that are involved in these countries have said, you will buy the carbon credits. Ooh, okay, we'll buy and sell them for you. That's what Al Gore was going to do, wanted to become the first carbon billionaire. That's how politicians work. Create a crisis and offer to sell everybody a solution. Now, somebody posted an article to What Really Happened earlier today. Here's proof climate change cultists have been scamming Americans for decades, and it's basically yet another newspaper clipping. This from 1932. The glaciers are melting. The Arctic is warming. You're all going to die. They've been playing this game for decades and making money off of it. Meanwhile, out here in the real world, from ABC 11, record cold temperatures freezing out farmers. Baltimore-Washington Airport sets new record low temperature. Ooh. January cold gives way to a more seasonal warm-up. And this article is rather interesting because they're trying to save the religion of human-caused global warming. And they admit record-breaking cold. And say, don't worry, later in the week it's going to get warmer. Really, you shouldn't pay any attention to all this snow and ice. It'll get warmer, trust us. Scientists in Great Britain, looking at all of the natural indicators, including the migrating birds, are saying Great Britain could see a winter as harsh as that of 1730, when they were still dealing with the Little Ice Age. Record cold in New Jersey forecast. It's amazing. They just keep on going. They have no shame. And I know why. You know why. Obamacare did not deliver the windfall of tax revenues that Obama needs to keep the Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer. So now they're coming back for the carbon tax, and they're in a big rush. They're going to have this big conference in Paris next month. I hope they get hit with a blizzard. And they're in a little bit of a bind, because the goal is to get you to pay a tax on carbon, and they've tried to obscure what they're doing. They've dropped human-caused global warming. Some of them are still using it. And they're saying climate change. But see, here's the rub. If the climate is getting colder, taxing carbon is going to make it worse, not better. And that's why some of them are still out there. Human-caused global warming, absolutely. And we're seeing all the usual propaganda articles coming out. It may be cold where you are, but trust us, it's broiling everywhere else. Now then, article out of Natural News again. Sellout politicians reintroduce bill to keep Americans in the dark about GMOs in their food. The last one failed due to overwhelming public pressure. This time they have come back and said, well, we understand people want freedom of choice, so we're coming back with this bill to ban mandatory GMO labeling, but we're including a provision that says people can put GMO-free labels on their products through a USDA accredited certification process. So in other words, the last version of the law had nothing about that. Nothing that said you can't put GMO-free on your product if it in fact is GMO-free. Now it's actually worse. To be able to put a GMO-free label on your product, you have to get permission from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has clearly been hand in glove with the GMO corporations all along. Nobody's going to get that certification, or it's going to be adulterated. It's like the USDA certified organic. When it actually started, it really was organic. And over time, under industry pressure and lobbying, that has now been changed. The USDA certified organic, little black and white round logo, basically means you've got a little more organic than you would otherwise. And they still allow chemicals in there. They still allow GMO, as long as it's below a certain level. Meanwhile, down in Guatemala, there has been a stunning reversal to the Monsanto law, where the government of Guatemala had passed a law basically granting these multinational GMO corporations exclusive authority over food crops in their country, and it triggered a huge, huge protest. And back in June of 2015, this law was passed to give exclusivity on patented seeds to a handful of these transnational companies, including Monsanto. And it triggered protests to the point where the Congress of Guatemala on September 4th was forced to repeal the law. See, if you stand up and you scream and shout about it, you will be able to push back. If the Guatemalans can do it, we can do it. All right, let's grab ourselves some phone calls here. Max in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
How you doing?
Doing okay.
Been watching your show for the last couple of years, and been following your website for about 10 years now, and so does a lot of my family. I just wanted to really quick make some comments about the last gentleman who called in. I have no relation to this person. Just heard him. He was discussing the subject of taxation.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to lend weight to his argument. He is correct, and I just wanted to ask you, it would be an interesting interview if you had this gentleman named Pete Hendrickson on your show to talk about this, because he can explain this in a very simple way that anybody could understand. I know it's very complicated, but I do know people who have been refunded in full, completely, everything, Social Security, all taxes, because they fill out the correct paperwork with the IRS. But people don't understand all of this because of the way it's been worded and duped, and the wool has been pulled over their eyes for, literally decades. And I know this hits home with you because you keep talking about voting with your wallet, and that's the only vote that really matters. And if we vote with our wallets, a lot of these problems will start to correct themselves.
Well, here's my problem. Okay, if you get this book and you follow this guy's rules, you're basically playing into the system, and you're basically conceding right from the start that the system is legitimate and valid. And I actually question that, and I think it's time for all Americans to question that.
No, what you are correct, and your concerns are well founded.
Okay.
The issue comes in with is the understanding is that the 1040 is actually a claim for refund for taxes, for taxable income, which most of us in the public who work for private entities are not liable for. But the way they dupe people into volunteering as the quote,
well, as you say, it's a dupe, it's a swindle, and I think it's time to start looking at that. Following these books and the instruction, you're basically admitting up front that the system is fair and just and legitimate, and I think it's time that we question that basic assumption. Max, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're closing the phone lines for the rest of the show here. Steve in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Let's see. I have a comment and a yes/no question, basically.
Okay.
I just want to echo the other couple of guys that called up, and to thank you, for keeping it simple, and even I can understand you. And I've been listening to you for probably 4 years, and I think back, and it's like, man, I have really learned a lot from you.
Thank you.
Because you just keep it. It's just, you're so easy to understand. And you are funny, too. And I appreciate that, too, because it's overload. It can be. But you got on the subject of GMOs. And I looked it up and tried to research it here, Mike, and I can't find anything. But I wonder if Israel either buys or produces GMO themselves.
I have to be honest, I really don't know. But it would certainly be an interesting question. The problem is that there is just a general trend in the United States, because everybody is desperate for money to pay their debts to the central bankers. All other considerations of the social contract have been abandoned. Nobody worries about safe products. Nobody worries about durable, long-lasting, reliable products. We live in an age of absolute planned obsolescence to get you to buy the same thing over and over and over again. New car every 5 years, new computer every 5 years, new TV every 3 years. That's the way it's set up, to just grind as much money out of the population to try and keep this pyramid scheme central bank ticking along just a little bit longer until somebody else is in office to take the fall when it all implodes.
I love your screening room, by the way.
Oh, yes, that's a good collection of documentaries. And
it certainly is. I don't know. I just brought it up because I didn't know if anybody knew or everybody knows about it. But yeah, there's that little TV on the left, and boy, you got some good stuff in there.
Yeah, there's really good stuff in there. I think it's time to reprise Aaron Russo's "America from Freedom to Fascism." I think that's time to get that one back out there again. Okay?
No, I saw that. I think it's still there. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Well, no, I mean put it on the front page, the main page. Steve, thank you very much.
Okay.
We're going to let you go here because we're running out of time. We're coming up on the top of the show, and I got a couple of breaking stories I need to report on. Canada's new Prime Minister-elect Justin Trudeau has already informed U.S. President Barack Obama Canadian warplanes will withdraw from Syria. So, yes. Okay. Now then, as you know, the U.S. government, by way of groveling to Tel Aviv, and apologies for failing to obey Israel and killing the P5+1 deal, has basically showered more billions of dollars for military armament all over Israel to assuage their fears about Iran. Well, it's now turned out Israel apparently isn't all that concerned about Iran because Israel has just sent Ukraine assault weapons. Huge shipment of assault weapons for Poroshenko's troops. Gee, I thought Israel needed that money because they were scared of the rock-throwing Palestinians and the non-nuclear armed Iranians. Apparently not. Over in St. Louis, and by the way, I have to comment on that story about they've acknowledged the first case of cancer linked to Fukushima. What a pile of nonsense that is. I mean, thyroid cancer among children around the Fukushima area has just gone right through the roof. And they're trying to act like, see, it wasn't any big deal. We've only got one case of cancer from a guy who was shoveling the ruined reactor cores. And yes, of course, he's going to come down sick. Remember, Japan was actually recruiting old people for the cleanup, figuring you're not going to live long enough anyway. It's amazing. But over in St. Louis, that underground landfill fire continues to move closer and closer to the radioactive waste dump left over from the United States nuclear weapons development program. There's no barrier in its way. There's nothing they can do about it. We've got another major nuclear release about to hit. And I'm sure they're going to get Ann Coulter to come on TV and say, look, a little radiation's actually good for you. And we didn't see Ann Coulter over there in Fukushima with a shovel cleaning up the mess, did we? Another story coming out of Natural News. You've been hearing about statins. Big, huge seller, hugely profitable, heart medication, going to clean things out. And now they've finally come out and admitted statins don't actually work the way they're supposed to. They can actually trigger strokes and heart attacks by causing large chunks of plaque to fall off the walls of your artery. And now they're discovering that people on cholesterol drugs are aging more rapidly than people who are not on them. People on statins are having a higher incidence of diabetes, and now they've even discovered statins can cause brain damage. Now, when you get to be my age, your brain is all you got left. And as we reported, I think it was just yesterday, over in Great Britain, they're finally admitting the swine flu vaccine they have been giving to children over there causes brain damage, permanent brain damage. And yet here in the United States, anytime the vaccine makers come up with a new concoction, and remember, they cannot be sued, they're legally protected, so they don't have an incentive to produce a safe, effective product. If it turns out to be dangerous, the vaccine court will take care of it with U.S. taxpayer funds. Same deal in Great Britain. The government is compensating the families of these kids who suffered permanent brain damage from the swine flu vaccine. The vaccine makers are off the hook completely. And again, it touches back on this idea that debt has driven us to a condition where the need to get those pieces of ink and paper or numbers in a computer is so great for companies and individuals. All other considerations they're not a factor anymore. This money junkie fever, this need for the pieces of ink and paper, this unpayable debt created by private central banking has destroyed what was best about the American character. We used to be a nation that took pride in making good products just for the pride of making a good product. We wanted to be the best in the world, not just the richest. We wanted the world to admire American cars and American electronics and American medications and American agriculture. We were the breadbasket to the world, and all of that has been destroyed by this constant drumbeat of pay the bankers, pay the bankers, pay the bankers, pay the bankers. And again, before we hit the end of the show, I want to reiterate, don't get sucked into this question about whether or not the U.S. government debt ceiling should be raised. That's not the question you should be asking. The question you should all be asking of your friends, family, and coworkers is why, when the Constitution authorizes the U.S. government to create and issue its own debt-free money, does our government persist in borrowing money at interest from a privately owned central bank and forcing us to pay those ruinous interest payments, that unpayable debt that holds us all slaves? Slavery has returned to the United States of America. The slave chains are made of paper. They're made of Federal Reserve notes. And that is the reality. And we need to recognize the system is not what was intended by the founding fathers of this nation. It has been hijacked by greed and corruption. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. A big shout-out thank you to all of you who have been calling your local talk radio stations and asking them to look at gcnlive.com and carry our programming. It is working. We're picking up affiliates all over the U.S., the Virgin Islands. So keep up the good work, you Riveros Rangers. I salute you. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.